Not all storms begin with thunder. Some start with silence, and that morning at Brooklyn High, a storm named Autumn Davis crossed the school's threshold without anyone noticing. A 14-year-old black girl, petite and quiet, stepped off the yellow bus into the chilly, early autumn breeze. Her faded backpack was strapped tightly to her shoulders. Her head lowered, eyes focused only on the tiles beneath her feet, as if stepping softly enough might cause the world to forget she existed. But the world never overlooks a silent black girl in a school buzzing with white noise and white faces. Autumn had transferred schools 3 times in 2 years, and each time she learned something that wasn't written in any textbook. The less you speak, the easier it is to survive. At her last school in Chicago, she had stood out, tried to fit in, even dared to smile at new classmates. That smile had cost her dearly. It led to months of pain she still relived in her sleep. This time, she didn't need friends, didn't want to stand out, didn't need a single curious stare. She just wanted to get through the school year without leaving a trace, as if she had never been there. The towering red brick building stood in front of her like a haunting monument. Fogged windows, narrow, packed hallways, and the echo of shoes tapping against tile from every direction. It looked like every other school she'd attended, polished on the outside, hiding a silent set of rules inside where different was enough to be alone. She let out a soft sigh and entered the flood of students pouring in. She tried not to bump into anyone, not to make eye contact, not to leave anything behind that someone might remember. But silence has its sound. Autumn heard those whispers loud enough to be inescapable. Who's that girl? Probably transferred from public school. She looks so out of place. They floated in and out of the noisy laughter around her. She tightened her grip on her backpack and quickened her pace, but not fast enough to outrun the undercurrent already rippling around her. She didn't stand out. She had no makeup, no fancy phone, no group of giggling friends linking arms, and just a pair of wide, deep brown eyes carrying an unspoken sadness. In the noisy crowd, she was a period in a room full of exclamation marks. And that in itself drew attention, not because she did anything wrong, simply because she wasn't like the rest. As she passed rows of light blue lockers searching for hers, she felt the atmosphere shift. The noise quieted. Conversations dipped into whispers. Students nearby took a subtle step back, as if the floor had just turned to ice. She didn't turn around, but she knew. Someone was walking up behind her, someone important. Everyone had long learned it was best to move aside for. And right then, Autumn's world began to fracture, not with a punch, but with a cold, cutting glance that slid over her shoulder, the first look from Hailey Whitmore. Autumn didn't turn her head. She only looked down and focused on her locker combination 17 to 4208, like it was the only thing in existence. But every part of her screamed behind her stood someone everyone avoided, not out of respect, but fear. Then came the footsteps. Not hurried, not loud, just deliberate, steady, like the knock of unquestioned power. When she glanced to the left, she saw the edge of an expensive plaid skirt glide past with the faint scent of perfume drifting into the school air. Hailey Whitmore, the girl who made every whisper break. Shoulder-length golden curls, each one perfectly styled like a salon. Porcelain skin, a thin smile sharp as a razor blade. Hailey didn't need to yell to be noticed. Her presence was a command. Beside her walked Savannah Clark with fiery red hair, eyes scanning the hallway like a predator's laser, and Madison Reyes, petite, wavy brown hair, always with a faint smile and ears that missed no secret. The 3 of them passed like a ritual. No one dared stand in their way. No one made eye contact. They didn't need to shove the crowd apart like the sea. But Autumn remained still. Her hand was still on the lock, and Hailey saw her. Hailey's glance lasted exactly 1 second, but that second delivered a silent message. I see you, and you're standing in the wrong place. A cold look, not judgmental, not angry, just a sentence passed with the eyes. Autumn, the quiet, black girl with no group, no glamour, was officially marked. She didn't have to do anything. Her existence was enough. And that's when she understood that not all schools post their rules on walls. Some write them in glances, smirks, the way people move around or away from someone. At Brooklyn High, Hailey was the law. She wrote the invisible caste system. Who sat at the middle table, who ate by the trash, who got to speak in class, who got laughed at for stumbling on a word. Everything passed through Hailey Whitmore's filter. And Autumn wasn't in the system, didn't belong to any tier. That made her dangerous. When someone doesn't follow the system, it treats them like a threat, even if they're standing still, unlocking a locker. Autumn didn't meet Hailey's gaze. She opened her locker, grabbed her books, and closed the metal door quietly, as if no unseen force had just loomed behind her. But inside, she knew the game had just begun. And she hadn't started it. She'd stepped one square out of place, on a chessboard already set. But Autumn didn't give them what they wanted. She didn't turn her head, didn't frown, didn't snap back. She just walked straight steadily as if the world behind her didn't exist. And somehow that made Hailey even more intrigued. To Hailey, Whitmore reactions were less important than control. A glance that crushed, a comment that made someone cry, a trap that turned the whole class into an audience laughing at one person. That was how she defined power. And Autumn, with her infuriating calm, refused to fall into any reaction Hailey was hoping for. Silence wasn't weakness, it was defiance, and defiance had no place in the world Hailey had built. Savannah chuckled softly, whispering, "She thinks she's good at hiding her emotions." Madison giggled, "The colder they act, the easier they shatter." But Autumn kept walking, still didn't turn, and with each step she remembered something her father once told her: silence is a kind of strength. But if no one understands that, they'll think you're weak. And maybe now Autumn began to understand. Her silence was becoming the excuse others needed to attack her. At Brooklyn High, lunchtime wasn't just for eating. It was when the power map got redrawn each day. Who got to sit in the center? Who had to sit alone? Who was greeted and who was ignored like a ghost? Every seat, every glance, every avoidant look was part of its secret language in this ecosystem. Autumn Davis knew that well. On her first day, she'd chosen the farthest table near the back wall, where the lighting was dim and the noise was just a distant hum. That was the spot everyone avoided, the place for names no one remembered. To Autumn, it was the safest space. But today that safe space had just been marked. Hailey Whitmore sat in her usual spot at the center table, legs crossed with a lunch tray neatly placed, her golden hair gleaming like a manufactured halo. Beside her were Savannah Clark and Madison Reyes, one as sharp as ice, the other as sly as a fox, two satellites never far from their queen. Everything felt like a familiar performance. Until Hailey tilted her head, her gaze locked straight toward the back of the room, toward Autumn, quietly eating with a book open beside her. "It's time," Hailey whispered, placing her hand on a crimson juice cup, a sweet cocktail reserved for a humiliation sweeter than sugar. Savannah and Madison understood instantly. They stood up, back straight, lips curled slightly, as if heading to a gala table, not a battlefield. Autumn didn't lift her head, but every muscle in her body tensed like a tightened string. Familiar footsteps approached, too evenly, too intentionally. The room seemed to slow around her, as if the whole space held its breath, waiting. Then a tall shadow fell over the table Hailey. Her eyes were lit, her smirk was crooked, and her hand tilted the juice cup like she was performing an ancient ritual. The deep red liquid poured out like blood. It spilled across the lunch tray, soaked into the book's pages, and dripped onto Autumn's white canvas shoes. The room went silent for a second. Then came the laughter, not in chorus, but scattered and awkward. It was as if everyone was trying to remember what they were supposed to do in a joke, but they weren't sure they wanted to laugh at it. "Oh, oops," Hailey said lightly, laced with fake innocence and real cruelty. "I didn't mean to." Autumn looked down at the drenched tray, the blotchy red mess. She said nothing, didn't sigh, didn't wince. She just set down her spoon, stood up, picked up her tray with both hands, and turned around with a calm so surreal it chilled the room. She walked down the aisle between the tables, each step slicing through the frozen crowd. She reached the trash can, dumped the entire tray, walked back, grabbed her backpack and left. No words, no insults, not a single tear. And that silence once again made everything collapse inside Hailey. Autumn gave Hailey one look. Not angry, not scared, not bitter, just quieter, colder, more dangerous. The look of someone who had nothing left to lose. Someone is no longer interested in playing anyone else's game. Hailey Whitmore, the girl who'd crushed dozens with a quip, stood frozen. She felt something slip from her hands. Not the juice cup. Power. As Autumn left the cafeteria, no one laughed. No one moved. Even Savannah and Madison couldn't find a word. No one knew exactly what had just happened. But everyone could feel it. Hailey Whitmore had just lost something she couldn't return. And Autumn, she didn't have to do a thing. Just rise, walk, and leave behind a silence heavy as stone. Hailey sat alone at the center table, chin resting on her palm, eyes fixed on the space where Autumn Davis had sat just minutes before. Everything was still in place, an untouched food tray and an empty juice cup, but no one dared touch anything. No one spoke. No one dared to ask. The air felt vacuumed from the room, and inside Hailey something cold began to crawl down her spine. She was used to controlling a single glare that silenced her friends. One well-placed whisper is enough to make a freshman apologize without knowing why. But today, just one silent move from Autumn, no anger, no retaliation, had made every rule Hailey had built seem ridiculous. And worse than that were the eyes around her. No one said anything to her, but she could feel it like a mirror pressed to her thoughts. The looks today weren't admiration or fear. They had doubts. Savannah still sat nearby, but her posture wasn't straight anymore. She kept tapping her phone, never looking at Hailey. Madison stirred her drink with a plastic straw, as if it were her life's purpose. No one spoke. No one laughed out of habit. No one felt like an extension of Hailey's power anymore. Hailey took a deep breath, but instead of calming her, her chest tightened as if someone had grabbed her shirt from the inside and pulled down. She gripped the empty cup tightly. Her eyes scanned the room. A few students at a nearby table were watching her, not looking for inspiration or waiting for orders. They were reading her. Hailey hated being read to. She was the one who wrote the scripts, the one who directed everyone like stage puppets. Now she was the side character in her scene. Panic didn't show on her face. She knew how to hide it. But inside it knocked louder every second. Why didn't she react? Why only silence? Any other student would have cried and shouted back, walked off with a humiliated face. But Autumn didn't. She stood up as if there was nothing worth being hurt by. As if Hailey didn't exist. Behind her, Savannah whispered, barely breathing, "She's not like the others." An innocent comment, but it hit Hailey like a stone. Not because Savannah had noticed it, but because Hailey had initially felt it. Autumn didn't respond like prey. She didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She stood in the middle of an attack like someone who'd survived far worse. Suddenly, Hailey stood. Her chair scraped loudly, drawing some eyes. Savannah and Madison followed reflexively, but Hailey didn't wait. She strode out of the cafeteria, her steps quicker than she intended. No looking back, no words, just walking as if the hallway might give her the space to breathe again. The hallway was empty, but Hailey's footsteps echoed off the blank walls like they bounced inside her hollow mind. She couldn't understand how someone as silent as Autumn could make her feel so out of control. She had dealt with tougher people, sharper people, louder rebels, but no one had ever made her feel small, with nothing but a silent stare. Hailey Whitmore didn't know what to do next for the first time in years, and in that moment the truth knocked her power only existed as long as others believed in it. Autumn didn't think. Autumn wasn't afraid, and to Hailey that was a threat more terrifying than any rebellion. At the far end of the hallway, a mirror reflected a proud posture now shaken. And in that very moment, Hailey realized something. She was no longer the only one who made others step aside when she walked past. That afternoon, the Brooklyn High athletic field buzzed with its usual noise footsteps, pounding on turf, teachers, blowing whistles, groups of kids, laughing like no one was watching. But power still pulsed quietly beneath that noise, especially during PE, where Hailey didn't need to signal. Autumn Davis knew that well. The moment she stepped onto the field, she saw Hailey watching from the bleachers, not with a mocking smile this time, but like a block of ice eyes, fixed and cold. Next to her were two familiar figures, Blake Whitmore, the school's golden boy football captain, and Travis King, the chaos junkie who thrived on making others squirm. Blake was tall, broad-shouldered, with wind-swept hair, and a smile that could melt any hallway. But to Autumn, he looked like a beautiful, powerful, and dangerous mobile fortress, if weaponized. Travis was different, the kind who needed others to laugh so he could feel real. His eyes sparkled with unhidden excitement, like he'd been waiting all week to play a new game. Class began with a simple warm-up 3 laps around the field. As usual, students broke off into familiar clusters, friends jogging together, the populace surrounded by fans. Autumn took her usual place in the back, alone. No one wanted to run with her, and she didn't want them to. But today, 2 familiar shadows moved silently into place, one on each side. Blake to her left, Travis to her right. Autumn didn't turn, didn't speak. But every step they took beside her added weight to the breath she fought to keep steady. Blake slowed down sometimes, then sped up to cut in front of her, forcing her to adjust. Travis circled close, brushing shoulders or nudging with his elbow. It was accidental contact, perfectly designed. Not enough to injure, but enough to make anyone feel hunted. She felt every bump deliberate, calculated, controlled. But she didn't retaliate, didn't glance sideways, didn't dodge too obviously. She slowed a beat, then glided ahead like wind shifting, bending instead of braking. From the bleachers, Hailey watched every step. Her face is emotionless, but her finger tapped the seat. She was waiting for a stumble, for Autumn to snap. A glare, a lip twitch. Any proof she still had control over this story. But Autumn kept running, steady, still, not racing, not losing. And that drove Hailey to clench her teeth. Blake cut in front again, stopping completely, making Autumn pivot to avoid crashing into him. But Autumn didn't retreat, didn't sidestep. She paused for just half a second and looked straight at him. Not with anger. It is not with confusion. It is just a gaze like a mirror. No admiration, no fear, just blank. Blake stepped back instinctively as if someone had nudged him. Autumn kept running. Travis, still hoping to draw some reaction, began to fumble. His shoulder bumps no longer drew laughs. A few students on the adjacent basketball court started watching. They didn't intervene, just observed and waited to see how Autumn would respond. But nothing happened. Autumn finished her final lap as if no one had been near her. A few students exchanged glances as she turned toward the walkway leading back to the gym. One whispered, "That girl's different." Another muttered, "Bet she knows martial arts." But no one laughed, no one mocked, no one. Hailey sat frozen. The ice in her eyes cracked just a hairline fracture, not enough to shatter everything, but sufficient to knock her heart off beat. Autumn Davis didn't need to fight back to be noticed. She just needed to exist in a way no one could control. And for Hailey, that was the first real threat she had ever faced in all her years ruling the school. That afternoon, Brooklyn was coated in a soft grey light. No rain, no sun, just a quiet veil that reminded people the day wasn't over, only paused, to let unspoken emotions find shelter. Autumn Davis walked a narrow street, each step heavier than she expected. Her backpack hung low, not from books, but from everything she had swallowed since morning. The old wooden gate in front of her small home creaked as she pushed it open. No one needed to greet her. Autumn was used to letting herself in. She dropped her bag and poured a glass of water, and sitting still for a long while, letting the feelings stuck in her throat sink. She didn't cry, didn't sigh. She just sat hands on knees, staring into the space between two walls where memories still hung like framed pictures no one dared remove. Then the front door opened. Familiar sounds followed: leather shoes on wood, a gym bag hitting the floor, steady footsteps. And finally, a warm, low voice behind her. "Autumn, how was today?" She didn't turn, just nodded barely. A nod from her father, Derek Davis, who once shook MMA arenas before injuries ended his career, was understood better than words. Derek placed a hand on her shoulder. Not firm, not rushed, just enough to say, "I'm here." Autumn whispered, her voice like wind through a cracked window. "They've started. No need to ask who, no need to ask what." Derek just tightened his hand in reflex. To men who knew pressure and understood when the body tenses, the first thing that must be released is breath. Minutes passed before Autumn spoke again. Not fast, not in order. She told it in scattered snapshots: Hailey's first stare, the blood-red juice, the strangled laughter in the cafeteria. Blake is blocking her path. Travis was brushing her shoulders, the stairs, the feeling of being trapped in a glass cage, every movement recorded. When she finished, Derek sat silently, then asked, his voice softer than wind, "How do you feel inside?" Autumn let out a dry laugh. "I feel like a compressed spring, wound so tight that if anyone pushes a little harder, I don't know what will happen." Derek wasn't surprised. His little girl, only 14, had been learning to control her anger before she fully understood the meaning of self-defense. He'd taught her how to lock a hold, how to pivot, how to take down someone twice her size, but always with one principle: no one wins by throwing the first punch. Real strength is knowing when you don't have to. But he also knew to hold fire long enough, and one day it will explode. Autumn lowered her head, fists clenched, fingernails pressing into her palms until they turned white. "Dad, I don't want to repeat what happened." And there it was, the dark memory she never spoke aloud. but which always lurked under the surface. 2 years ago it was a harmless clash, a provocation that crossed the line, and a single instinctive counterstrike that landed a girl named Erica in the hospital. No one asked why. No one understood the context. All they saw was a black girl attacking a classmate. That was the end of the story. Derek looked up, his eyes no longer those of a coach, but of a father terrified of losing his child to the very society he once believed he'd learned to fight. "Autumn," he said, "I didn't teach you martial arts so you could win. I taught you so you'd know when to end it." She looked up, eyes red and glassy. "But what if ending it means I have to hit them?" Derek paused. Then he spoke slowly, every word deliberate. "You don't need to fight to win, but you don't have to suffer endlessly to prove noble." He stood up, walked to the center of the room, raised his arms to mimic a lock move, then released gently. His eyes were fixed on his daughter. "Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop anyone from repeating the hurt you've already survived." Autumn looked at him. For the first time in days, her eyes weren't clouded. They sharpened as if something inside had finally been untangled. She didn't nod. She didn't say thank you. She just stood up, walked to her father and hugged him. No tears, no soothing words, but tight, long, and enough for Derek to know his daughter had chosen her path. Not the path of attention, not the path of reckless defiance, but the path of ending a cycle in the calmest and most unyielding way possible. The next morning, sunlight filtered gently through the windows lining the Brooklyn High hallways, casting long shadows on the polished tile floor. It seemed like any other day, bells ringing, students shuffling to class, scattered laughter like familiar background music. But no one said it aloud. Something felt different, lighter, quieter, filled with tension. Autumn walked in, as usual, a plain white shirt, a backpack slung over one shoulder, steady steps and eyes forward. But only she knew a string had snapped inside her the night before. No more shrinking. No more fear of being wrong. No more hiding. When she reached her locker, she saw it immediately. A white sheet was taped to the light blue metal door. Black ink. Sharp, cold handwriting like a command after school, behind the sports field. "If you don't show, don't blame anyone for calling you a coward." At the bottom, a perfectly penned name, Hailey Whitmore. Autumn wasn't surprised. She stared at the message for seconds like reading a standard reminder. Around her, students pretended to open their lockers, but every eye subtly turned her way. They knew. Everyone knew. The rumor had spread yesterday Hailey would end it today. All eyes were fixed on her, but no one spoke. No one dared step between the two worlds about to collide. Autumn peeled the paper from her locker, folded it into quarters, and tucked it into her coat pocket. She didn't rip it, didn't crumple it, didn't throw it away like some hoped she would. She kept it. As an official invitation, a ticket to the showdown. Then she turned away, calm as if nothing had happened. But inside her heartbeat tapped against her chest like a steady drum. This is the first time, and it will be the only time. There's no turning back. A group of students parted like the sea at the end of the hallway. Hailey emerged with blazing blonde hair under fluorescent lights, face pale and flawless like porcelain. Beside her, Savannah and Madison. Behind her were two familiar human walls, Blake Whitmore and Travis King. They moved forward, each step deliberate. And when they stood exactly 3 steps away from Autumn, Hailey stopped. She gave a thin smile, the smile of someone who knew the audience was waiting for her to star in the scene. "I hope you don't disappear at the last minute," Hailey said, voice sugary and poisoned. "I'm tired of this strong and silent game, Autumn. After today, I'll make sure you know your place at Brooklyn High." Savannah chuckled softly. Madison scanned the crowd, checking if the stage was set correctly. Autumn didn't answer right away. She locked eyes with Hailey. For the first time, no flinching, no looking away. Just direct, steady. And then in a low, calm voice, Autumn said, "I'll be there." The words hit the floor like a stone dropped into still water. Not a challenge, not loud defiance, but a confirmation. As if she'd RSVP'd to an ending. The hallway froze. Students are pretending to read, pretending to check their phones, and pretending to laugh. All stopped. No one expected Autumn to say that. No one thought she'd accept, but she had. Without trembling, without delay. Hailey blinked, a tiny twitch in her face, subtle enough for no one else to notice. But Autumn saw it, and in that offbeat blink she saw the first crack in a game that was no longer one-sided. "Good," Hailey said, trying to hold her usual smirk. "Don't disappoint me." Then she turned, swept past Autumn like the conversation never happened. But her footsteps were quicker than usual. Her eyes were no longer smug. Her hand was clutching her bag strap tightly. She had seen something she didn't want to see. Autumn stood a moment longer, took one deep breath, not to calm herself, but to confirm this battle. She would not dodge, and she would not compromise. Because sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to end the poison before it swallows you. That afternoon, Brooklyn's sky turned grey, as if it too knew something was about to erupt. The wind blew stronger than usual. Leaves swirled beneath students' feet, quietly making their way to the field behind the school. No one spoke loudly. No one laughed. Only quick, hesitant footsteps, as if everyone sensed they were about to witness something no one had ever seen. Autumn Davis exited the main building just as the dismissal bell rang. She didn't rush. She carried no backpack, just her gym clothes and a pair of faded white sneakers. Her eyes were steady, her shoulders straight, and her spine tall. Nothing in her posture suggested fear. Behind the school, more than 20 students had gathered in a semicircle. In the center, like a slash across the lawn, stood Hailey Whitmore, arms crossed, trying to maintain a cold smile, though her lips trembled slightly. To her left was Blake, towering like a fortress. Travis hunched somewhat to her right, eyes gleaming with anticipation, like a man waiting for chaos. And behind them, the crowd. No one dared step in, but everyone held their breath, waiting to see if the old power could survive against someone no longer bowed. Autumn walked up, stopping exactly 3 steps from Hailey, precisely the same distance from their first hallway encounter a week earlier. She didn't greet, didn't provoke. She just stood there, straight as a post in the storm. "Wow," Hailey said, voice a mix of mockery and nervous tremor. "I thought you'd run." Autumn didn't answer. Her gaze firm as bedrock, cold as a still lake, was the reply Hailey didn't want. Hailey sneered, casting a glance at Blake and Travis. A silent signal go. Blake stepped forward first. Broad shoulders, rippling muscles, each step thudding like thunder. He looked at Autumn as if she were debris to clear. No one, including Blake, thought this small girl would last a single blow. He said nothing, just charged forward and swung. But he never touched her. In the blink of an eye, Autumn tilted fluid like water. She didn't push, didn't strike. She redirected his force. Her hand landed gently on his wrist, just the right spot, and she pivoted. Blake had no idea what hit him. He found himself flat on the grass, his back slammed down, his eyes wide, like he'd been broken by air. The crowd held its breath. No one spoke. No one could believe it. No one had seen something so simple and so exact. Acting on instinct, Travis lunged, fist clenched, shouting a short, heavy growl. But Autumn didn't yell. She didn't dodge. She tilted just enough for his punch to slice through the air. As he lost his footing, she caught his wrist, turned, pulled, and locked his arm behind his back in a light, unhurting hold. Travis cried out, his knee hitting the ground. The crowd recoiled as if a bomb had gone off. Autumn released him the moment he stopped resisting. She stepped back, stood tall, calm, no raised fists, no bravado, as if she hadn't taken anyone down, only restored order. All eyes turned to Hailey, and this time she didn't know what to do. Hailey stepped back. Then, as if pride yanked her forward, she lunged, screaming, no longer composed. But Autumn wouldn't let her make contact. With a spin, a low center of gravity, and a precise grip on her wrist, Hailey lost balance. She stumbled, nearly falling, but Autumn caught her. Didn't let her face hit the dirt, only made her feel powerless. Then Autumn leaned close to her ear. Her voice was soft, but it echoed across the field. You never controlled me. And you were never strong. Hailey froze. She felt her hand tremble, not from pain, but from fear. Fear of the eyes watching. Fear of the whispers rising. Fear of the first time. She wasn't the center. Autumn let go. Gently. No humiliation, no toss, just an ending. Hailey stepped back. She looked around. All the faces that once smiled at her now watched like she was something past. Autumn turned, no wave, no triumphant grin. She stepped out of the circle through the silent crowd, leaving behind a crumbled empire. The next morning, the Brooklyn High hallway wasn't the same. No hesitant footsteps when Hailey Whitmore appeared. No wary glances. No forced smiles. No tension in the air. Everything was quiet, but not from fear, from the hush of an era ending. Hailey entered the school as usual, hair neat, expensive dress crisp, but no heads turned, no greetings, no one cleared the way. The same students who once looked up at her now glanced past. Groups that parted for her before now barely shifted, then went back to their conversations. They saw her, but they didn't look. Across the hall, Autumn Davis entered, like every day, plain uniform, calm eyes, backpack over one shoulder. But this time, every step she took brought silence. Not cheers, not a celebration, just eyes, and a quiet recognition, respect that didn't need to be spoken. And that was the cruelest punishment for Hailey. That lunchtime, Hailey sat alone. No Savannah, no Madison. No Blake was dazzling under cafeteria lights. No Travis was laughing like a megaphone of her power. Just an empty table, an untouched tray, and a girl who once believed her power would never fade. Hailey glanced around, caught a few students' eyes. They quickly looked down as if staring too long was awkward. What once was her stage was now the seat no one wanted near. Far off, Autumn ate quietly like every day. Didn't talk, didn't need a crowd. But today, a few eyes turned to her, not in fear, but in curiosity, admiration, maybe even hope. And then something no one expected happened. Autumn stood up. Carrying her tray, she walked through the noisy cafeteria aisle and stopped directly in front of Hailey. The room tightened. Chewing stopped. Words died. Forks froze mid-air. Everyone waited for retaliation, for revenge, for drama. But none came. Autumn gently placed her tray down on the table, looked Hailey in the eye, not with defiance, not with pity, but with the grace of someone who had already won and didn't need anyone to know it. Her voice was low, steady, not loud, but it carried through the entire cafeteria. That's over. I'm not continuing, and I hope you won't either. No one spoke. No one laughed. No one dared interrupt the moment because everyone felt it. This moment meant more than any takedown. Hailey sat frozen. She couldn't speak, couldn't look away, couldn't walk away. She just stared at Autumn, and for the first time, she understood what it meant for power not to come from domination, but from the choice not to retaliate. Autumn didn't wait for a response. She turned, walked away from the table, and left behind a tray of food, along with a mirror that reflected the truth Hailey had avoided for years: power without dignity is fear in disguise. From that day on, Autumn didn't become popular. She didn't suddenly have hundreds of friends. No one crowned her the new queen, but she became the one person at Brooklyn High whom teachers and students quietly respected. And that was more than enough for Autumn. Because she didn't come to be praised, she came to prove that sometimes silence isn't weakness, but the sharpest weapon of a spirit that refuses to break. That lunch period at the cafeteria felt wrapped in a thin fog of silence. Not the silence of fear, but the kind of hush that falls when everyone knows they're witnessing something rare for the age of 14. Autumn Davis walked toward the table where Hailey Whitmore was now sitting alone. No Savannah, no Madison, no admiring glances. Just a tray of untouched food, a girl with hollow eyes and the awkward quiet of those who once cheered now looking away. Autumn's footsteps were as light as breath, but each seemed to still the air. When she stopped before Hailey, no one dared to breathe loudly. Every eye in the room landed there where two former opposites now stood facing each other, with no walls between them. Autumn looked down, not with a sharp gaze, not cold, but with a calm depth of someone who had nothing left to fear. And then her voice rang out, not loud, not harsh, but as clear as first morning light. "It's over. I don't intend to continue." That was it. No gloating, no accusation. It wasn't a declaration of victory, it was an exit. Not forgiveness for Hailey's sake, but for her own. Forgiveness not out of weakness, but from strength strong enough to stop hating. Hailey looked up, her eyes still wet from being silently dismissed by everyone else. But when she looked at Autumn, she didn't see contempt. She saw something she had never understood before, a kind of mercy that didn't seek praise but refused to be controlled by hatred. Autumn gave a slight nod, then turned and walked away, leaving behind a girl who was no longer an opponent, a queen, but just another student trying to let go. And for the first time, no one in the cafeteria clapped. No one cheered. They just sat quietly, as if they finally understood. This wasn't a story about victory, it was a story about growing up. The week after Brooklyn High felt like a different school. No one gave orders. No one was treated like the center of the universe. Tables once reserved for the popular started to see new faces. Students who used to be pushed to the corners were now invited to join groups. And Hailey Whitmore, though unable to smile again, still showed up each day, walking slower through the halls, no longer arrogant, no longer entitled. Just ordinary. For the first time, she was learning to be a student like everyone else. And Autumn Davis, she didn't become a symbol. She didn't lead a clique. But wherever she went, she received different glances, not pity, not fear, but respect. A few students who once laughed at her now nodded quietly when passing. Teachers began to mention her composure as an example in class. And the more vulnerable students seemed to feel safer knowing Autumn was there. No one called her name over the loudspeakers. No one gave her a medal, but everyone remembered that there was once a girl who didn't need to rage, didn't need to shout, didn't need to strike back cruelly, yet still made the entire system question how it had been running. And that was the most significant victory of all. The final message, the takeaway from this story for anyone reading True Strength, doesn't lie in controlling others, but in standing your ground under pressure. In a world full of noise and competition, the one who doesn't speak from anger, who doesn't stay silent from fear, is the one who will change everything with unwavering stillness.